Hi, if you would like to learn how to create a fixed image, a link on your Divi website, which can be closed with the X icon, then this video is for you. Hello, my name is Ania, and my goal here is to help you build beautiful websites. So anytime we are running a promotion or a sale or introducing a new product on the Divi Lover website, I add this little image, a link fixed at the bottom left corner of the screen, which links to that landing page for that event. It can be closed with the little X icon, and I get asked how to create something like that. So in this video I'm going to do just that. I will show you how to create this little promo pop-up on your Divi website, and it doesn't really matter if you are using the theme builder to create your footer, or if you're still sticking to the default Divi footer. We are going to add that element through the theme options integration tab. So let's have a quick look at how it looks. I am using it now on the Divi Lover website. As you notice, after a few seconds, when the page loads, it waits a moment and then it fades in right here, and as we scroll it is fixed in the same place. Basically I can close it, but when I go to a new page or refresh the page, it will still show up after a short delay, just like that. The only page it doesn't show up is the landing page for that sale only. So here I don't need to link to that page again. It wouldn't make sense to display that bubble on that landing page, but any other page visited by my website visitors, whether it's a blog page or a product page or just a home page, this little bubble link will notify them about that sale. Okay, just a quick note. I think this isn't something you would want to keep on your website forever. It should be used as the promo bar, so just to notify about something on occasion and not always, because we aren't adding any cookies to the closing icon, so it will open every time a page refreshes, and it can get annoying. So only use it when it really makes sense for your website. Okay, so let's get to work. The first thing we need is an image that we are going to display in that circle, and I usually just go with a square image so that it positions itself nicely inside the circle. I have a sample image here. Now I will copy the link, the URL of that file. Okay, so we have our image, and now inside Divi theme options integration tab, we can add that image inside our body tag. Okay, so here we just need some basic HTML structure. First, a wrapper, a div, so div with a class DL info popup. Okay, something like that, and we have to close that div. Right, so that's the wrapper element. We'll target that with CSS to make sure that it is positioned where we want, in the corner of the page. And inside that wrapper, there's our link. So href, that's where we need to place the URL of the landing page. Like that. We have to close that link. And inside that link, instead of the text, we'll just insert the image tag. So image source, and that would be the URL I copied. We can specify the alt attribute, super offer, something like that, just in case that image won't load. And the closing tag, an additional element for our close icon. Okay, so I will add a span tag here, span with a class close, just an empty span. We'll use CSS to add this X icon inside. Okay, so that's a great start. And now let's save that and let's see how that looks on the front end. So there's our image right there, just after the footer. And as I mentioned, it doesn't matter if you're using the theme builder or not. This adds that HTML just before the closing body tag. So it's right there at the bottom here. And now we can inspect the page and see how we can modify the position of that element with CSS. Okay, so we do want to target our container, which we've added the class DL info popup. So let's add a new rule here. And we want to position this using the fixed position. Let's start from the bottom, let's say 20 pixels, and left also 20 pixels. So somewhere here, that's a great start, right? But we also want that image to have a background, a rounded background. We can add that background to the A element itself. So another selector would be A element inside DL info popup. And this could have background, dark background, so something like that. We need to display that block like this, and then we can use border radius to make it rounded. So border radius 50%. The info pop-up wrapper can have a fixed size like width and height. Let's try with 300 pixels or maybe 250 or maybe 200, okay? And also height 200, just to make sure it's square. And for the link, we might want to add some padding so that if the image is square, it doesn't go outside of the round shape. So padding, let's try with 10% maybe, something like that. That looks good. I think I do want to make it a bit smaller, so let's try with 150. Okay, so that looks good. And now for the closing element, we have a span with a class close. Okay, so a span with a class close, but we shouldn't target it this way. That's too generic. There could be different spans with a class close on your website. So we do want to specify the parent container, which is DL info popup, and that will help us target only that element and nothing else. So we want to position that absolutely. So position absolute. Let's try with top 0, right 0. We don't see it yet, so width 30 pixels, height 30 pixels, background white. Okay, so there it is. There's our shape for the closing icon. We also want this to be rounded, so border radius 15 is enough. If the width is set to 30 pixels, border radius 15 pixels will make it rounded. And now I can see that I could bring it a bit closer to the shape here, so maybe top 5 pixels, something like that. Okay, and for the icon itself, we will use the before pseudo element. So for the same element, for that span, we'll add a before, and we'll use the elegant themes icon font to display that X icon. So first we need to display that element. So display block, also position absolutely, and we can make sure it's right, it has the same size as the parent, so we can specify top, right, bottom and left values to 0. Okay, let's make it darker. Let's specify the font size, 24 pixels, font family, that would be ET modules. We can choose it. The inspector already shows us what fonts are we using on that site, so we can choose from that list here. So we want to use font family ET modules. And I do remember the content value for that icon. And that should be backslash 4D. That's the content for the X icon. Okay, like this. So there it is, there's our X icon. We do want to make sure that in the center, so let's change the line height to 30 pixels and text align center. Okay, that's a great look, I would say. And now we can see all the CSS I've been adding here in the inspector. If I click here, that will show me the temporary style sheet that has been created for me. So I can copy all that CSS, everything I just wrote in the inspector, I can copy this and add that here in my theme options, or inside the child theme if I would use a child theme. So our CSS is loaded on the page. So if I save now and close that and refresh the page, nothing should change. So there's our little pop-up, little icon. I do want to add some shadow behind the closing X icon. It doesn't look good on the white background. And also, if we look at the Divi Lover website, that I do have this animated glow behind that element. You see that there's this, it's better visible on dark background, so it does kind of help bring even more attention to that element. To make it happen, we could animate the box shadow for that link, but I do like to make this multicolored. So if I would want to use a gradient, like a gradient shadow, that wouldn't be possible with just a box shadow property. So we can do that by specifying additional element that will use a blur and gradient background, and we can make it visible and hidden using the CSS animations. So back in the theme integration tab, theme options integration tab, in our DL info pop-up, I'm going to add additional div with a class BG for background. Okay, just an empty div. Let's save that. And now when we refresh the page, we can see that new element right here, and we can target it. Let's specify our selector. Obviously the class BG is too generic, so again we have to specify the parent, DL info pop-up, display block with 100%, height 100%, position absolute, first a fallback background color, so background, let's use this, and background image, that's for the linear gradient. And inspector already gives us all the syntax we need to use. So I would go with -15. So that would be my bottom color, and here the second color, like this. And I can see that my link has a bit different size. We have to fix that, but this we need this to be rounded, so border radius 50%. That also makes it round if it's square. And we have to fix the Z index, specify the Z index. So Z index 1, and then our link needs to have a higher Z index, so Z index 2, but the Z index property only works for positioned elements, and we haven't specified the position for our A link. So position relative, okay? That places that link on top of the background. And just to make sure it is the same width and height, let's specify height 100% and width 100%. That would be as big as our size of our container. And the close span, that needs to have even higher Z index, so Z index 3. Okay, now the last thing is the blur, so filter, blur, and let's try with 30 pixels, something like that, okay? And we will specify animation for that background, and animation keyframes will change the opacity from 0 to 100 and then back to 0. So here in the inspector temporary style sheet, we can specify our keyframes. Add keyframes, and we have to specify the name of the animation. So just a simple opacity should work. And now different stages for each keyframe. So at 0%, opacity would be 0. Then at 50%, opacity will be changed to 1. And then at 100%, it's back to 0. Like this. Okay, so these are our keyframes for the opacity animation. And now we have to attach that animation to our background here. So animation, opacity, so animation name, duration, let's say 3 seconds, timing function, so is, in, out, and then iteration count, how many times we want the animation to run, and we want this to run infinitely, so infinite. You see, it is already working. We have this blurry background make visible and hidden again. Okay, so one last thing is maybe adding a little bit of box shadow behind the closing icon, and also changing the cursor to pointer here. So DL info pop-up close box shadow, maybe 1 pixel, 3 pixel, and then blur, let's try with 10 pixels, and some semi-transparent black, like this. Okay, maybe we can add a bit more blur to it. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so it still is visible even if the colorful background is hidden. There is this slight shadow that shows the shape of that closing icon. Oh, and the cursor pointer. Because it's not a link, so it wouldn't have that hand cursor by default. Okay, and again, we can copy that CSS to our theme options, general settings. And I can copy this for the close element because I already specified that element here. So I can add that CSS to the same element, not to repeat myself. Okay, so the CSS is ready, and now we will have to add some JavaScript to make it work, to make it so that when we click the closing icon, that element gets hidden, and also we want to show it with a delay. So one additional thing I will do here is to set the whole container to display none at the beginning. Okay, so display none, and then we will show it with JavaScript but with a slight delay. So I will save that changes here, and now back in the integration tab we can add a simple bit of JavaScript code. So we will need to place it inside the script tag, opening and closing tag, and here I will use jQuery. So jQuery document ready function. Basically we want to tell the browser that we want to use jQuery. Okay, like this. That's the function we need to use to make sure that the browser knows we want to use jQuery. And here, if we add a dollar sign, we can use that sign instead of jQuery. So first our target, DL info popup. Okay, so we want to fade it in, but with a delay. So first a delay method, and inside the brackets we can specify the milliseconds, number of milliseconds. So let's say we want to wait 2 seconds, that would be 2000 milliseconds, and then we want to fade it in. So fade in, just like that, with the default timing. So that code will wait for the document to load, and when our web page is loaded, it will wait additional 2 seconds and fade in our element with a class DL info popup. The next thing we need to do is make sure that when we click the close element, so we have to target that close inside DL info popup, span with a class close, we want to perform a function on click, and we can use the click method. So click function, like that. And the first thing that we should do is to prevent default. That's the name of the method that will make sure that there's no page scroll or any unwanted behavior on that click, except for what we want to do. So we define the event handler for that function. We can call it E, and then E prevent default, like this. Okay, and now what we want to happen when we click on that close icon, we want to fade out the DL info popup, and we could specify it just like that. So DL info popup fade out, like this, but we can be more specific, and instead of finding that selector this way, we can use this element. So this will refer to what's the target of that function, and this parent, because the popup in that div is the direct parent element of that close span, right? So that will make sure that we are closing the parent of that thing we are clicking on, okay? So here's the end of the function and a closing script tag. Now we can save that, and if I refresh the page, it waits 2 seconds, and then it shows, and I can see that we do have that z-index issue, and that's because I didn't copy the that A element. We've added the position relative to it and the z-index of 2, and also the width and height. So I didn't copy that from the inspector. Okay, so now it should work. 1, 2, there it is. Okay, so the that closing element also needs to have better z-index, but it is working. So let's see the close. Yes, the z-index is also missing. That was 3. Refresh the page. There's our pop-up, and we can either click on the link that would take us to the landing page URL, which doesn't exist, but any URL we want, and then the closing icon hides it if we don't want to see it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that walkthrough, and as always, feel free to copy the code I used from the blog post on the Divi Lover website, and I'll see you next time.